pretty back in there.
Oh, yeah.
I have deer out my window every day.
Very different than mine.
Yeah.
Good to go. All right, call to order the November 9th, 2022 meeting of Grandview Heights Board of Zoning Appeals. Let's start with Pledge of Allegiance. If you're joining me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Megan, roll call.
Renas, please excused. Count out.
Here.
Lasusa.
Here.
Scotsman.
Here.
Chair Kinzinger.
Here.
Director Mazzara.
Here.
Director Coker.
Here.
Okay, I think we're gonna put off approval of the minutes till next month. I know I haven't had enough time to review it yet. So. All right, so now anybody who is going to be speaking today, or even if you think you might be speaking, if you could stand, raise your right hand, and just repeat after me. I swear to tell the truth.
I swear to tell the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
Thank you. Do we have any changes to agenda?
There are no changes.
All right. Before we start with the first case, I want to make the point to the applicants that there are 4 of us, 5 here. And the way that the rules of the BZA are written, you need 3 approvals in order to have it. Three out. It doesn't say 3 out of 5. It says you have to have 3. So whenever we are not full strength, we always make that point to the applicants that if for whatever reason you want to wait until next month when hopefully we will be all 5, then that's your right to do that. Just want to make that point. And you also can pull out at any time. You can pull out, you can propose, you can present your application and then decide, you know what, I'm going to wait till next. So you don't have to make that decision right now. Let's start with the first case. BZA case 11-2022, 1232 Parkway Drive. Applicant Catherine Miller Fosnaw.
Good job. Close.
Close, Fosnaw?
Fosnaw, yeah.
Fosnaw.
You had it. You
Okay.
said it.
Owner Catherine Miller Fosnaw. Let's see. The applicant is seeking 5 variances. I won't read through all of them. Why don't you come up here and tell us what we've got in front of us?
Sure. Brenda is also my architect, so we'll have double here on it if we need it. We're asking for, do you want me to do an overview of the project or just the 5 variances?
Yeah, probably an overview. Would be good.
Okay, on it. The base of the project is a couple different pieces. We're adding a foyer onto the side, which goes off of an existing side door. We are adding a workshop alongside of an existing block garage and a storage loft above the whole thing. And adding an egress window to our basement in order to allow us to have usable space down there. So those are the 3 main pieces of the project that require variances. The first variance is we have an existing stone fence. We traded that out for a chain link fence that encroached. Basically, we had part of our neighbor's property within the fence line when we bought the house. So we removed that pretty quickly after moving in and put in a stone patio on a broken up concrete slab. That existing stone fence it extends 1 feet 6 inches past the allowable 10 feet of the rear plane of the home. So it's allowing that to stay in place. As part of the same project with that, we put a outdoor bar structure that's on part of it, and that sits along the lot line. So we're asking for that to be allowed to stay in place as well. For the egress window, we're asking to have the side yard setback reduced from 6 feet to 3 feet 9 inches. That just allows us to get the egress well in there on that side of the home. We are also allowing for, requesting for a small setback reduction on the side with the foyer as well, from 6 feet to 4 feet 8 inches. From an aesthetic perspective, it allows us to get a full-size door in as well as cabinetry in there to make it functional. And lastly, we're asking to increase the allowable square footage of our garage from 677 to 840. That allows us to have the extra workshop added onto the side. Good summary?
Okay. Yep, that's good for now.
Anything else?
Just
Okay.
hang out
Hang out?
for when we get around to questions. But you go to staff.
All right, so nothing super unusual about the, just looking at the site services overview pages, nothing of note there to draw your attention to. Nothing to the considerations and recommendations. The lot, just to kind of set the table on the overall lot, 45 feet wide, 162 feet deep. 7,274 square feet. So it's a compliant lot, one of the larger ones in RS2. Lot coverage is relatively nominal on the project, 30% compared to 40% permitted. Taking the variances one by one, the fence, if you will, the existing masonry, I don't know what else you call it than a fence, even though it's masonry. Is at only 5 feet high, is actually allowed to be where it is. So that's a correction, if you will, to the variance. There's no variance required in terms of the height or location of this because it's permitted since it's shorter than 5 feet or shorter. On the side yards, side yard setback for the foyer and the egress window, just a few things to consider on that. First of all, I will let you know that the pinch point that's created from the foyer and that the pier for one of the fences, I did review that condition with fire, and they're okay with it the way it's presented because it's just momentary. The overall home, because the lot is a little wider, even with this additional, with the addition, there's still going to be a fair amount of space on either side. The existing home is 11 feet back from the east property line. The addition, as was mentioned, will bring that down to 4'8" versus 6 foot that's required. On the egress window side, technically the side yard will be reduced to 3'9", but that's an at-grade element, so it doesn't have a presence visually. It doesn't interrupt anything in terms of access on that side. Together, visually, the setbacks are almost 12 feet, so in terms of the impact visually, it's almost compliant with at least the sum total. And as the applicant was saying, the foyer that's proposed is sized reasonably with regard to the size of the home. It's only single story, so again, you don't get like the visual blocker on a side yard element there that you would if it were 2 stories. All in all, we don't have any objections. Staff has no objections to that request and would recommend approval. On the hospitality bar that's existing, I noticed there was a reference actually to side yard for primary structure. So this is a change in the code reference. Should have actually been 115302E for accessory structures, which would be 3 feet. The bar is a foot off the property line, so it's a variance for 2 feet. It's in lieu of what it would have been for primary structure. Again, very nominal. The bar is only 2 feet wide. No concerns about this either. Would also recommend approval. On the accessory structure size, maybe the most challenging of the requested variances, if you will. However, I think the frame for this can reasonably the way I looked at it at least is that the way the applicant is proposing to improve their lot retains a lot of green space, which a lot of people don't, and it's a positive, I think, overall, that we retain green space in the neighborhood. So by taking advantage of basement space rather than a larger addition in the back, the house itself is remaining small, which of course our codes tie together between the house and the garage. One of the intentions of that has to do with relative scale of an accessory structure versus the home, so that may be something that the board wants to discuss with the applicant. In terms of having space over garages, it seems to be what the neighborhood, what the market is really pushing for, having that additional space because of the smaller lots generally that we have here. The roof shape, so we did work with the applicant to look at redesigning what had been originally proposed as a kind of undifferentiated gable roof garage, and to bring in something with the it's kind of Dutch colonial gambrel shape to the roof, and turning part of the garage in opposite direction of the roof to get a little bit of breakdown in scale, so it didn't look quite as massive as the original proposal. So with all the various considerations the applicant was willing to make on that, we also have no objection to the proposal on that either, and would recommend approval subject to any additional feedback the board may have. That's my report.
Thank you. All right, at this time, we ask if there's any comments from the community. Anybody who would like to make a comment about this? Yes, sir. Please state your name and your address.
The name's Tom DeMaria, 1226 Parkway Drive. I was going to send you an email, but I decided to show up in person. My wife, Kathy Lithgow, and I have lived on the east side of this house under consideration for 42 years. During my time in Grandview, I've served on numerous committees. And I was actually appointed by the mayor in 2008 to serve as a member of the committee that worked with Jeff Darby, Benjamin Ricci, and associates to develop the Grandview design guidelines that are so often referred to at these meetings. I reviewed my notes from 14 years ago and thought that the sentence on page 52 might be pertinent to this evening's discussions. It says in part that if a garage needs to be renovated or replaced, try to keep the garage as small as possible while making sure that it still functions for modern uses. I think we would all agree that modern uses in 2022 is quite different than it was 14 years ago when we wrote those guidelines. Current storage needs have increased to a point that requests for garage additions have become more commonplace at BZA meetings. I want to provide a backstory to this application. Katie bought the house, which was terribly neglected, in 2010 at a sheriff's sale. She has a master plan for the house and is hands-on. She's an accomplished amateur basic carpenter and stonemason. She learned many of these skills from her dad. She, by any estimate, is also a highly qualified finish carpenter. The raised panels in her dining room and other trim she has completed throughout her house are exceptional. She personally owns a considerable collection of tools that are stored in her garage, and she can often be found out during the winter months using a table saw to rip new molding materials. I've been in her garage, and there's little room to move around. I want to end by saying that she bought the house when she was single. But since then, she's acquired a husband and a 1-year-old daughter. The family's need for storage space is real, and my wife and I hope that you will approve all aspects of our application. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay. Do we have any other community comment on this application? Okay, then we'll move to board discussion. Who would like to go first?
So I just want to, just kind of looking through this. So in terms of the things that are new requests, so number one, I'm looking at the 5 things. Number one is an existing condition regarding the pier.
It is not applicable because the pier is 5 feet tall, so it's.
So, yeah,
So number one is the fence, the wall.
Okay, so I can, yes, that one's good, and then
Right.
the number 4 for the existing bar is, and if we deem that it can remain, but that one's also an existing condition.
Right, that one,
But clean up.
we will vote on that,
Yeah.
but that is the existing condition, yes.
But then in terms of new things that are gonna be added, it's 3, 5, and 2. Yeah, 2, 3, 5.
Yes.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
perfect. I just wanted to make sure I.
So this is more discussion to justify my thoughts on this. I agree with Director Colker that I think that this lot is on the larger size for a lot of the houses in RS2, which makes a difference when we're looking at all of these variances, especially for the garage size, because a lot of the other houses are not, that don't have a lot that's that wide, or a lot that is that large. So I think that the request for a 2-car garage addition with a storage workshop space is reasonable. And similarly, I think that there are a lot of other houses that are asking for the 2nd-story space for storage on top of their garage as well. Regarding the 2 side yard variances, I agree that it is commendable that they are trying to keep their green space on their lot and trying to utilize the space within their existing house with the minimal addition.
Director Felker, I think, I don't know if you said it, but I think maybe I read it. I just want to make it your report. I just want to be clear. The garage is allowed to be 50% of the footprint of the house. I think you said in your report that if the house were to grow to double this requested garage size, so in other words, if then the garage was 50% of the house, that it still would meet lot coverage requirements.
Correct, which is uncommon.
Yes, it's very, yeah.
But in this case.
Okay.
I thought aesthetically the garage matches the house nicely with the roof lines and materials used.
Yeah, I would say likewise, I think there's a lot of careful attention to design to try to emphasize green space, and the garage is kind of the trade-off for that. So I agree that the garage looks very nice and fits in well with the rest of the house. On the side, the egress window, I'm just trying to picture it. I don't know if there's a picture of it in the plans anywhere, but just kind of, is it like one of those like storm doors that kind of is like a triangular looking egress, or?
As
What-
far as what we're going to pick for the egress wall, or what?
What makes it protrude out, I guess? I'm just trying to picture.
So they basically build out a block structure that goes down into the earth, so at grade
Yep.
with it. And they do typically have a cover over the top of them and a drain in the bottom that ties into your foundation drain. But the covers themselves are normally at grade, like Liz said.
Yeah, okay, that's what I was picturing. I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Director Colbert, this is more of a question for you regarding this project. So many of the houses in Grandview have stairs up to the front door. So I guess if the foyer, we're considering it grade level, but also like the new entry to the house, would that then be, would then like the preference be to have stairs up to the main entrance then?
Well, actually, if you look, there's a number of these foyers that have been added also, and they tend to be closer to at grade as this one is.
Okay.
So this is typical, porches are up, but when there's a side entry, because they're doing as they're doing, splitting the middle with the stairs, they're often lower, closer to grade like this.
Okay, thank you.
Can you speak to either applicant or architect? There's an awful lot of windows in the second story for storage, and this body has in the past taken exception with that. Because we're trying to make sure that we're preserving it as storage. We know the city tells us that they believe there's a lot of these garages that end up getting used not for storage.
Right.
And we're trying to do what we can to make sure that it ultimately is storage. And like the windows on the east and west is, I guess, really what to me stands out as curious.
Well, I'll go ahead and talk about it. So it's twofold. Number one, if you had that entire plane any which way without a window, it's not going to match the house in the same way it does right now. On it with it, it becomes just a whole wall of shade on it, or a whole wall of siding that I don't think it is as aesthetically pleasing as it is in this structure matching the house. The secondary reason is it's a garage, and without me running a bunch of lights up there and be able to use the space for storage on it with it, having the windows is the way we're gonna see and be able to move things around. We will be bringing up and down on a regular basis. Like Tom said, I have a ridiculous amount of tools that will go up and down regular, so to just have that space be lighter is helpful. And it will generally be me because my husband's 6'5" and we're referring to 6'3", so he will not be super helpful with that process on a regular basis. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess the other thing that gives me pause is the side yard setback variance for the foyer. And maybe I would ask staff if there's something I'm missing, but we often talk about variances are granted, excuse me, when there's a practical difficulty is the typical expression. And a lot of times with RS2, that's when it's a non-compliant lot and it's not as wide as zoning. And I guess I'm struggling to understand what might be that practical difficulty here. I think it looks nice, but that's not really our job is not what we like or don't like. Our job is, does it meet the criteria for a variance?
So the practical difficulty for me is that we have a Dutch colonial with a central staircase on it, and I can't move the position of the house on the lot as it sits. I also could have completely redone the interior to move the staircase, but the only place I can tie in foyer right now, as she pointed out earlier, is the side yard right there. It's just, there's no other way to tie it in and leave the existing original staircase, which, as Tom said, we've restored, so I really don't want to change it. So that was the most practical place to put that foyer. The reason for it being slightly wider is because the Dutch colonial does have some kind of functional obsolescence for today's lifestyle. We have, strollers and coats and all of those things that we now have to bring inside the home. Because of the design of the Dutch Colonial, there's no reasonable way for me to get that space in the existing one, so that is why it has a little bit wider footprint. It's to meet today's life, and if I could shift the house a little bit one way or the other, I wouldn't have a problem, but I can't, unfortunately. No. Yeah, we have no downstairs closets, 0.
Yeah, I guess that, me personally, I'm just struggling with the, yeah, I guess it's the built-in shelves, this built-in storage there that, because we're talking about a variance of 1 foot, 3.5 inches. Right? So,
And that's the whole difference between us being able to get in depth cabinetry and not depth cabinetry. So to be able to hang a coat or not hang a coat.
Just to offer that the board has certainly considered the location of an existing structure on the lot as kind of creating a limitation to what can reasonably be done. The applicant articulated that pretty well. It's also, the setback variance is only for the 14-foot depth of this foyer, right? It's not the
Right, it's
full
not the-
extent.
right, and that does make a big difference. Yes. Yeah, I think the fact that the fire chief hasn't flagged it as problematic, the fact that the neighbors on that side are here speaking positively for this, I'm glad we had this conversation. I'm inclined to be in favor of that one too. Okay. Any? Somebody like to make a motion?
I can try to make a motion. I'm the new guy, so you guys might have to bear with me for a second. So I'd like to make a
Hold on.
motion.
First of all, do we have any requests here to do these separately or do them all together? Anybody? Anybody on board?
I'm doing them all together.
Okay, so go
Let's
ahead.
go through them all.
Go ahead and make one.
And do I need to make reference to MA, even if it's not?
I think we're
You
just gonna
don't.
skip ahead.
Okay.
And D, you said now,
Oh, it's a
is
different.
is
Is
the 1155.02 E.
And this one was 53. All right. Make a motion to approve BZA case 11-2022 1232 Parkway Drive. Applicant is pursuing a variance ZC 1155.02 Part C 2A. Okay,
You can skip A.
okay, or B. The applicant is seeking approval from the Board of Zoning Appeals per Grandview Heights Planning and Zoning Code Section 1155.02 C2A to reduce the side yard setback from 6 feet to 4 feet 8 1/2 inches to allow a one-story foyer addition to the east side of the home. The applicant is also seeking approval from the Board of Zoning Appeals per Grandview Heights Planning and Zoning Code Section 1155.02 C2A to reduce the side yard setback from 6 feet to 3 feet 9 inches for a basement egress window on the west side of the home. The applicant is seeking approval from the Board of Zoning Appeals per Grandview Heights Planning and Zoning Code Section 1153.02 E to allow an existing bar on the east side of the home to remain. and the applicant is seeking approval from the Board of Zoning Appeals per Grandview Heights Planning and Zoning Code Section 1153.02A to increase the allowable square footage from 677 square feet to 840 square feet, which is an increase of 163 square feet.
I second.
Goudsman?
Yes.
Sousa?
Yes.
Count
Yes.
Chair Kinzinger?
Yes.
Okay, approved.
Thank you. All right, so we move on to our next case, BZA case 12-2022, 1163 Grandview Avenue, applicant Brenda Parker, owner Nathan R. and Bonnie E. Rogers. Tell us what we've got.
Sure. Okay. This house on Grandview Avenue, it's the standard kind of brick, 4 square. It has a front porch with brick columns. The porch is partially enclosed with glass panels. So a portion of the porch is enclosed and then a portion of the porch is open. It is currently, the enclosure portion is a 3-season room. There's no heat there. They would like to add heat, in which case we're asking to exchange the glass panels for a knee wall and a bank and more banks of windows that'll be insulated windows, so we can kind of insulate and meet the energy code. There is also a garage component. Similar to the last case, they have an existing block and brick garage, and they are wanting to put the storage loft on the second floor. The tough component with this garage is it is 0 lot line condition at the rear of the property and a 2'5" at the north. So when we add that second story, there can be no windows on those walls and they have to be fire rated, and the 0 lot line can have no overhangs per the building code. So it was indicated in the pre-application meeting that they would need to obtain an easement with the neighboring property at the rear to, gain access for construction and maintenance and so forth. So they have not been able to approach the neighbor to discuss the easement yet, but I was hoping we could have a discussion just to see what the general feeling is about the project. If it's a hard no, then we'll drop it and won't come back, to pursue that case. I believe it's the understanding that we would resubmit again once they have that easement in place. I think that was kind of the discussion that we had, that we wanted to get the easement in place before you guys even made the decision. So those are the 2 projects. There's a lot of existing conditions that are not currently meeting the zoning code. One is the size of the garage. The allowable size is 599 square feet and the existing garage is 624. And they also are over on their rear yard lot coverage. So this is an existing condition as well. Allowable is 45% and they're at 58%. And then we're doing aesthetic review for the porch and possibly the garage. We'll see how the discussion goes. But I did do a streetscape for the porch just so we could see the neighboring houses. So if it's okay, I'll pass these out. you want to see one? Okay. So on Grandview Avenue, I kind of started midway. This house is 2 houses south of First Avenue. So I kind of started mid-block at 1123 with the ugly enclosed porch. And then we go to 1129, and this is again a partially enclosed front porch. This 1129 is very similar to the condition of the house that we're talking about at 1163. 1137 has a partially enclosed porch as well. 1143 is open. I think the rest of them are open. So there's kind of 3 that have partial enclosures, and then 4 that would be open, and then 1 that is partially enclosed, and then 2 more that are open. And then up in the upper right-hand corner is an inspiration image of the goal for what this enclosed porch will look like. So it's going to have more glass than the 1137 enclosed porch, which is mostly solid. So with that front porch, you know, the variance request is to ask for an enclosed porch beyond the 40-foot setback line, whichever the front yard setback line is. So I think that's it.
Thank you. On staff?
Yeah, all right. So it's an interesting lot, actually. On the first page, that's a good place to stop. I don't know this to be true. I didn't have a chance to go, look historically and see when that lot 1521 West First may have been created, but it seems unlikely that it would have been originally platted and probably was carved out of the 3 lots facing Grandview Avenue. And I suspect that the location of that lot line may have been set by the existing garage, and it's as far back as I could go. So the existing garage for the property at issue tonight is right on the lot line there. They got a lot split at some point in the past, so there would have been an official filing. I don't know if you turned up anything in your record. So probably older. But in any event, that's just interesting history. If you jump to the conditions and recommendations, just a little bit of feedback. It's a 44 and change foot wide lot, only 135 foot deep, which is pretty shallow, and really a combination of that and the fact that the front yard setbacks all along this area are deeper. They're 45 feet versus much of the neighborhood with this kind of development happens 30 feet. So both of those things are kind of squished in the backyard, causing some of the issues, particularly the rear yard overage. In terms of the front porch, challenging in the sense that the design guidelines are fairly articulate about not enclosing front porches. So that's sort of the backdrop for the request. Most of the porches in the neighborhood are still open. There are a few that are closed on this block, however, the majority are still open. Existing front porch enclosure is what I would call temporary, sort of patio enclosure style. It could be removed, and the existing architecture would still be there relatively unaffected, able to be returned to that original open porch state if someone wanted to do that. If it were modified to be a heated and more architecturally articulated enclosure, that would be a more difficult task in the future. That said, because of the deep front lot line and the shallow depth, it would be difficult to add a rear addition to the house. So that may be a countervailing consideration. Some homes along this block, as well as in other areas in the neighborhood, have found a balance that has been reasonable between the amount of enclosed space and the amount of remaining open front porch space. Might be an opportunity also to discuss that possibility, if that is something that would interest the board. But in terms of the strength of opinion in the design guidelines, and the proposed design, it's a handsome design. This is maybe one of those situations where if I were deciding on my own without the design guidelines, I'd be like, this looks good. But I think the design guidelines are just, they speak so strongly to front porches, I cannot recommend approval on this, but could be something that the board considers. With regard to the garage, what Brenda relayed is true. We had talked about getting an easement in place before ruling. However, in further thinking that through, I think that piece, since they're here tonight, that piece could be handled in advance of a building permit, and just keeping this issue to a zoning question. Given that it is existing condition, the existing garage is a higher quality garage. It's masonry with brick. It's not liable to move anytime soon. The request is relatively nominal. The architecture is being handled well in terms of fire safety. The fire department actually was in favor of this because it will put fire-rated construction in the place of non-fire-rated construction, which is what's there currently. Presumably, I actually don't know that for a fact, but that was their observation. And so they were in favor. Anyway, for a variety of reasons that we've already kind of articulated, we are recommending approval for both the side yard setback for the accessory structure. The rear yard lot coverage variance is requested because they have to be able to get to the garage. The lot is very shallow, the front setback very deep. They just have a hardship there. And accessory structure size is existing, and they're not changing that. So we're recommending approval on all of those requests for the modification to the garage. Happy to answer any questions.
Well, I think first let's see if there's any community comment. Anybody who wants to comment on this application? Okay, seeing none, next we'll go to board discussion. Comments, questions, discussion. So I tend to agree. I think we could vote on the garage-related variances here and just be clear that an easement for the construction be a condition of getting a building permit. Is what we have in front of us for the garage ready for us to do that?
Yes.
Okay.
Dr. Culver, I just wanted to be clear, the aesthetic review is just for the porch, correct? Not for the garage?
Correct. Yep.
My initial thoughts, looking at the inspiration image versus the plans for 1163 is kind of reflects what the staff report said. I think that, in the inspiration image, you kind of see more of a almost 50-50 use of the front porch of outdoor and enclosed. And the aesthetic perception of the planned construction, at least, really looks to be more closed in and with very little, very little keeping of that original feel of the front porch. So I think if there can be some balance there, that's certainly maybe something the board might have other comments on it. Curious to hear, but that's my initial thought, just looking at the inspiration image and the staff report versus what the plans drawings show.
I do, to add on to that, I think the newer build or the newer addition at 1137 is very much along those lines, where the majority of, like over 50% of the front elevation is open porch versus the enclosed portion. Do we know, was there a variance for 1137?
Did you find any historic?
I did that project. It was back before this administration, if you know what I mean. And the full porch of the existing house was completely enclosed, so we were kind of improving the situation by returning some of it back to front porch. Thank you.
And the 45 feet comes from, because we have it's a minimum of 30, but it also has to be like the average of the,
Or the average, whichever is greater.
whichever is greater. Right.
I think the 45 feet is like a platted setback, right, versus the zoning
It's not
setback.
platted, it's consistent along, I mean, somebody in the past decided that's what it should be, I don't know.
Yeah, I think
Mostly
it's
the
on the
setbacks are
survey,
45.
it has a 45 foot.
Okay.
Certainly like those 6 houses all in a row are all the same distance.
Yeah.
So it's,
If I can make a clarification, currently, the existing condition is already a three-season porch, right?
Right, it's already a 3-season enclosure.
So it's not like you're taking an open porch and it's already enclosed, just a 3-season, trying to make it a 4, okay?
Right. Right, and we're matching the footprint of what the existing 3-season is. Just taking those glass panels out and putting new windows in.
In some conversations I have heard in the past, there's been more receptivity to a 3-season situation for the reasons sort of stated in the staff report, which is that they could be removed later. There could be a specific need and a specific time for something like that, or certainly if an improvement was being made, that would have been positively received, but generally the full stop architectural revision to heated interior space historically has been, it's well articulated in the design guidelines, that has been the community's preference, if you will.
yeah, I think what I'm struggling with, but I don't want to speak for everybody else, is just adherence to the design guidelines. That's, which obviously are guidelines, but we do tend to try to do our best to respect those guidelines.
So I think it's some math, I think it's right. The ratio is 30% open to 70% closed. And I think, as Tyler was saying, I think if it's something that's closer to that 40 or 50%, like in some of the inspiration image and other examples, I think it gets closer to being acceptable.
But the footprint of the porch is not changing, so it is staying open.
I mean, I think we could compromise to that 50% condition, so it doesn't seem so large of an enclosure. We could give up some of the space and return it to the open porch condition.
I do think that would help. I think the spirit of the design guidelines is that Grandview homes typically have a front porch. I think this reads more like a covered entryway and not a porch. The open part of it is a covered entryway and not like you couldn't put chairs there and sit out on the porch.
It's more like a portico and not,
Yeah.
a larger
And-
porch.
And I guess if it was halfway, then there's room there for chairs or a bench or whatever.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Is there any consideration to having access, I understand the 4-season nature, but having access to that from that front porch with a permanent slider or something else that would still be weathered? I think that's the other thing about how it is with true transoms, it is a very tight entryway.
Yeah, I mean, I think they'd be open to putting doors there if it was allowable.
But then you're also taking away like any
The usable
place that you
space.
could put like chairs or something, because
Right.
you can't put them on, really on the other side. On, in both the Four Seasons and the other one.
Yeah, they probably just function as like, kind of like fixed panels at that point.
All right, I guess let's, do we have any more questions, comments on the front porch? Maybe we'll kind of keep the garage is a different topic. Anything else on the porch?
On this front porch, I agree with the design guidelines that I think that the spirit of having an open front porch should be upheld. But I think that if you could enclose a smaller portion of this porch and leave a larger portion of that front porch, I do think that there is a difficulty on this lot with the depth of the lot. And there really is no place to build backwards. And I do think that that is a hardship.
So, I guess, in your mind, what would be enough open space?
We need to keep in mind the symmetry of the house. The 50% works well because you're not creating any symmetry at that point.
Yeah, it looks like.
This is kind of thirds right now.
Yeah, it looks like if you lose the window closest to the front door, at least from the sketch I have, it would be almost right at 50/50.
Just about,
It probably, yeah, it actually kind of makes it better because then it makes the porch symmetrical with the upper, the second story and that upper gable.
And I think it's more similar to the other house down the street too.
Give the inspiration image.
See, then,
I'd say that. Because I think otherwise your interior space is going to be too small to be useful.
do we, if, given that aesthetic review is kind of at staff's option when that happens and when it doesn't, we generally approve the aesthetic review saying with a porch that, with open space of half of the current porch, or however you want to phrase it, is that enough direction to give to staff so that
I think so.
then probably you would be comfortable with them approving whatever they came back in? I mean, I'm not saying we don't want to see it again, I'm just trying to make it
Yeah.
as easy as possible for the applicant.
Yeah, well, particularly I assume that it would not be super dissimilar, partially different, but the basic design would be similar. I think that would be fine.
Okay. And Brenda, you think that's something that they would be okay with?
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a nice compromise.
Okay. So, yeah, you want to talk about the garage now?
Sure.
Okay.
think all of these are,
So-
the last items are existing conditions.
They're really, yeah, the side yard and the rear lot coverage are certainly existing. Is the square footage changing?
No, but the garage is bigger than 50% of the footprint of the
Right.
house. But
the
it's an
current footprint
existing-
is staying the same.
Yeah,
It's really about going up with it.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, I guess, given that it's all existing, yeah, I think there's just we talked about the condition of the easement, construction easement with the neighbors. Is that only on the rear neighbors that we're talking about? They've got 2'5" on the other?
Certainly on the rear,
Side.
depends on how.
Right, yeah, send the skinny guy in.
Right.
Okay.
I think this design is in keeping with the rest of the designs that we've seen before us recently.
Yes. Right.
Yeah, I really trying to, that front gable, trying to match those gables on the front of the house, the same pitch and so forth.
Is the gable to the west? I guess I'm mostly just curious, what's the thought there, as opposed to just not having a gable? I mean, since there's no window there, what's?
Yeah, I gave them the option, it allows them to have more storage
More space.
space.
What's the current garage roof? It's just a,
Just an asphalt shingle gable
Over.
with siding on
just a single
the,
slope, yeah.
yeah.
Anything else?
Everything else.
Okay, maybe for E, yeah, sure, let's split it.
I'm gonna break this into two. I make a motion to approve BZA case 12-2022, 1163 Grandview Avenue. Part A, the applicant is seeking zoning approval from the Board of Zoning Appeals per zoning code section 1155.02C 2B to maintain a porch enclosure within the front yard setback. Approval of a porch enclosure with the condition that the extent of the enclosure of the porch shall be no more than 50% of the porch width.
A second.
Wait. Did you
Are
want
we
to?
gonna split it? Do you wanna split it total?
Yeah, but if we're splitting it in porch and garage, then E needs to be part of this.
Oh, for us.
Mm.
Sorry. I'm sorry, and
Second.
section E, I make a motion to approve aesthetic review, given the architect and applicant working with the Grandview Heights Planning and Zoning Commission and staff.
Second.
Kavanaugh?
Yes.
Gottesman?
Yes.
Susan?
Yes.
Chair Kinzinger?
Yes.
Next one, too?
Make a motion to approve BZA case 2022, 1163 Grandview Avenue, for a variance from Building and Zoning Code, section 1153.02E, to reduce the garage side yard setback from 3 feet to 0 feet on the west side of the property, and from 3 feet to 2 foot 5 inches on the north property line. The applicant is also seeking approval for Planning and Zoning Code Section 1153.02A to increase the allowable garage square footage size from 599 square feet to 624 square feet. And to approve a variance for the Grandview Heights Planning and Zoning Code Section 1155.14D to increase the allowable rear yard lot coverage from 45% to 58%.
A second.
Susan?
Yes.
Kavanaugh?
Yes.
Gottesman?
Yes.
Chair Kinzinger?
Yes. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for the streetscape. You know how much we like this. Okay, moving on to our third and final case today. BZA case 13-2022, 1271 Broadview Avenue, applicant Mazin? Mazin, all right, that's close, that was pretty close. Mazin, maybe I should congratulate myself for the last name. Mazin Shalash?
Yeah, Shalash.
Shalash?
Yes.
Okay. Owner, Mazin Shalash and Kristen Mattoon. Why don't you step up and tell us what we've got here?
My wife and I live there, and we recently, in January, had a major fire. And so because of the extent of the damage, we're proposing to demo and then rebuild as opposed to just rebuild. And then in doing so, we would need to move the garage back and also make it bigger. I think that's pretty much it. We're just in the house that's livable. The fire was pretty bad. It ate up the entire middle section of the first floor, burned up a lot of the second floor. It affected the exterior, the structure of the home. Like there's like one main beam, I guess, that runs along the first floor that holds up the entire house. So there's like temporary support right now that's hopefully gonna hold. We've had a structural engineer recommend that it, instead of just rebuilding, just demo it and put a new one there. And they don't know what caused the fire because nothing was really, it was built a while ago, 1925, so they're not sure exactly what it was. I personally think it was kind of electrical because we've had electrical problems in the past and I've called several times, but they can't prove any of that, so to me it just would make a lot more sense to get a new one built and make it up to code. Also, we have a growing family that would like to live there for a long time, so it would just make it feel better.
Okay.
Any questions?
Okay, go on to staff.
Yeah. So fairly significant case, of course. demolition of the existing structure and then construction, as was mentioned, of a new two-story home and three-car garage. With regard to demolition, if we start with that, there's a couple of major issues, I guess, there. One is just from a process perspective. I want to kind of talk about that for a minute. Then we can talk about the substance. The demolition procedure code is written in a somewhat convoluted manner, in my humble opinion. I think it could use some attention. However, it is what it is. So as I reread it for writing the staff report, there's a requirement to have the actual filing for the demolition permit in hand for you to be able to approve a demolition permit. That was not completed, is not in hand. There's some other things that need to be done. It really makes more sense to do after you would get kind of approval from a board about this topic to then file that piece of paper, but that's just not the way the code is written. So that's a consideration, certainly for tonight. And then in terms of substance, I appreciate the applicant providing information which is required in the case of a demolition. This is a historic home, no more so or less so than others, but an older home, original home here in Grandview. There was significant damage done, but unless I'm missing something in the structural report, I didn't find anything indicating that the home couldn't be repaired or that demolition was specifically recommended. There's discrete area of damage, joist on the first floor that would need to be replaced. The main joist, main beam holding up the first floor joist would also need to be replaced. But that's the major extent of the damage. Exterior, not so much damage. Some damage from the firefighting that occurred. But in any event, again, happy to stand corrected if there's some right here, but I did not see where a specific recommendation for demolition was recommended. The summary conclusions in the report state that structural damage was primarily on the first floor. There is some potential for additional damage to be found inside the house, the balloon frame, and so there can be damage on the exterior wall that can't be seen while the plaster is still in place. And of course, there's also a financial component, and I don't know if you got any information from when we spoke before.
Nothing written.
On that, right? So it's the cost, relative cost is maybe not clear yet. So those are some considerations. Of course, the design guidelines generally want us to preserve the existing housing stock. There's clearly reasonable reason to consider what's in the best interest of the home that has had a major fire. So just including in the report reference again to that preservation of older architecture when it can be done. Because of the procedural issues and the kind of significance of this question broadly to demolish an older home, I'm just recommending preliminary feedback tonight. It's really all you can do from a procedural perspective anyway. Also, within the demolition section of the code, it stipulates that you have to have an approved reconstruction. And in reviewing the proposal after we got the set of drawings, there's a couple of things in here at least that I think would bear some revision and or that may not be strictly speaking necessary when you've got a carte blanche lot. So we can look at some of those now if you'd like to turn to the questions of the variances for the potential new home. Again, to set the stage, the lot's 40 feet wide, it's 180 feet deep, 7,200 square feet, so it is compliant both in width and area. Does not have a rear alley, so it does, because off-street parking is required, would have to have a driveway. that does, influence the location of the house on the lot and push it to be justified one way or the other. In the case it's presented, it would be justified south a little bit. There's a request for a 1 foot setback reduction on the south side for the full length of the house. On the north side of the driveway, you'd have a wider setback there that is required 9 feet, so a total of 14 feet versus 12 required. Staff really does take no exception to this. Fire, again, no issue with this request. From a lot coverage perspective, the calculation on the drawings is not exactly accurate. It doesn't include everything that we include here in our jurisdiction, and it didn't actually have, the drawings were not 100% clear to me what they intended, but I used the rear yard lot coverage information that was provided by the applicant, and it looks as though therefore that what I'm reading from a couple of lines on the page to be paving is intended to be paving. Otherwise, a rear yard lot coverage wouldn't be a problem. So if that's all correct, the way I'm calculating it, they would be asking for a 50% lot coverage versus 40% permitted. Most of that arising from the rear hardscape, and I think that could be revised. It doesn't have to do with the home or the garage. It's the hardscape, and I think that could be revised to be compliant, so not recommending approval on that one. Rear yard lot coverage, similarly, there's more hardscaping indicated back there than you may even be aware of, I don't know, or desire. It's not very well elaborated on in the drawings. So again, not seeing a fundamental hardship that would drive that, so not recommending approval on that one either. From an aesthetic review perspective, the house is, generally consistent with homes in the area, with the front porch and the articulation, materiality, horizontal siding, these sorts of things. So generally, it's close, I would say, in that regard. There are some things, however, that the design guidelines might suggest are refined a bit. Just can highlight some of those. Again, the guiding principle about renovation, redevelopment, respecting the physical context, scale, adjacent nearby buildings. In looking more closely at the drawings, the things that I've noticed over time, looking at new homes or significant renovations or additions in the front, things that really kind of create the consistency of the fabric that hangs together between the houses here in town. One has to do with a fairly common height for a front porch. Another has to do with the height to the first floor. In both of these cases, the way it's drawn at least, it's lower, closer to the ground than we would ordinarily see in this neighborhood. There may be a functional issue there as well, another challenge that the neighborhood has, and I'm going out of order now, but got a high water table here. People who don't do projects here don't always know that, and if you have a deep basement because you've got a house that's set low to the ground, you can get beyond the water table, which is challenging from a maintenance perspective, but also can create a safety hazard with some pump that runs constantly and ends up with ice on the ground. So there's some issues with where the building is set that might want to be further elaborated on and refined. This vertical scale of the house is a little more grand than most homes in Grandview. It's shown as 12 feet ceiling, so 13-foot floor to floor on the first floor and 9-foot ceilings on the second floor. Fairly commonly in the area, we're less than 9 feet on the first floor, less than 8 on the second floor. And the dimension to the top of the roof here in this case is just a little bit more than 35 feet. It's not exceeding the height limit by a lot, but it is taller than many of the homes in the area, and maybe particularly if it needs to be set up a little higher to get out of the ground, some of those floors might want to come down a bit.
You said it's not exceeding the height requirement by a lot.
It's a few inches.
Does it require a variance as it is now?
It would require variance. Let's see, the porch is a little shallow compared to ordinarily. They're 8 to 10 feet in this neighborhood, and it's shown as only 7 feet deep. The setback appears to be consistent with the existing homes, but there wasn't enough information provided in the packet for me to be completely clear on that, what the intention is there. Three-car garages, a three-car garage, most often when those are permitted on the variety of factors, and I think in this case you would get to the 50% would be respected. A single mass is something the design guidelines would not necessarily prefer. There would be better if there could be a two bay and a one bay separated with maybe turning the roof there. So those are some considerations that flow from the design guidelines based on for the design as submitted. If the board is inclined to positively consider a demolition request, those would be some things that you might consider providing feedback on from an aesthetic review perspective. And that's all I have.
Okay. I guess I would ask for community comment next. Yeah, I guess we'll.
You do affected and then not affected, isn't that the order of things? Because I think some people here are directly affected. Okay.
Yeah, we can do it in that order.
Somewhere in something I read, it seemed like that was the order of it, because there's several of us.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Waters. I live at 1263 Broadview. I am the house directly next door to the east. I have asked Julie Bullock to provide an expert opinion and to assist me this evening. She is an architect, lived in Grandview for nearly 30 years. Her eldest graduated in the class of 2020, and her youngest just graduated from Grandview High School last year. She has lived both between First and Third Avenue block, west of Grandview Avenue, as well as most recently on Wyandotte, south of First. So she knows what it's like to live in different areas of the city and all of that. So, Julie, if you could assist me.
Let me ask, you said you are across the street to the east?
No, I live next door. I am the white and green house. I'm
She's
1263
She's
directly south.
exactly south.
Oh, south. Okay.
Yeah.
First house south. Okay.
Right. The house on the other side is not occupied. It was recently sold, so
Mhm.
no one really knows to be able to say anything because it's in the middle of closing, as well as the house directly across the street is empty and was just flipped, and so neither of those houses are going to be able to respond.
Hi, my name is Julie, and I'm an architect. I do a lot of work in historic districts, Victorian Village, German Village, Grandview, and I do a lot of variances, so I understand, why these are sometimes required. When I'm looking at these projects, I think it's important to look at context, and that's probably the biggest issue we have with this. I would say first that I read the whole demolition report. I'm preservationist, fully admit to it. I don't like to tear down old buildings unless we absolutely have to. When I read the report, I kind of agreed with, I think, what Liz was saying. I'm really not, at this point, seeing justification for demolition. That's not my decision to make, but I'll just say, in my opinion, there needs to be more reports from structural engineers, things to show that, and again, it's, needs to be demolished. When this house was built in 1924, it's almost 100 years old. It's a great example of Grandview architecture, so I just would hope that you take that under serious consideration.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but now that it's come up a couple times, I wanted to ask, the report that you read, was that the one from the insurance company?
Yes, that's the only
Okay.
one I had access to.
Just today, we were given an additional report from a structural, an engineer, I don't know if it's structural.
No,
An engineer
we haven't
stamped
seen that.
on.
Yeah,
And
it was an independent.
And I guess,
engineer.
Liz, there is definitely a line in there that says recommend demolition.
Yeah, I have to say
Because
it's
the
the first
insurance
time
was
seeing
kind of
this
leaning
as well.
one way.
Okay.
Yeah, based on
Wow.
the extent of renovation and remodeling, not the structure.
It does seem that way, yes.
So we brought out our own.
okay, I apologize.
That's good to know. So I think we have a few objections to this. Probably biggest issue is with the side yard variance, and the drawings that I handed out, I went out and I measured proximity to the property line. Elizabeth also provided an actual boundary survey. And essentially, she is about a little less, or 21 inches from the property line now of the adjacent house. And with the overhang, she's actually only about 2 7/8 inches from the property line. So if that's...
My house was built in 1908, so, you know.
So with the 4-foot setback, the variance that they're requesting with their overhang, these overhangs could be as little as 3 feet apart. I think it's a fire code issue, it's also an accessibility issue. We feel like in these circumstances with the proximity to the neighboring property, that the 6-foot side yard should be maintained. And right now, the house is at 6 foot 7 inches from the property line. That projection has beautiful old windows, looks right onto the neighbor's house, and it would be very, very close. We wouldn't even be able to maintain the property, you know, if they were built to that side yard setback. So that's one concern we have.
Especially with the egress for the basement bedroom, that would essentially come on, it looks like on page 39, that it'll come over the property line.
As a clarification,
And there's going to be no way for
this
anyone.
exhibit is current condition, correct?
Yes, current conditions, but the gray is what he's proposing. I tried to take, I have to say, I found a few discrepancies on the drawings. It was a little hard
That's where I'm struggling
to
to.
assimilate what the footprint is based on what was in the packet that was online, the gray footprint. The other is the existing house based
The
on what's on.
yellow is the current house, and the orange is the proposed, based upon.
Yeah, so it's about 3 times this footprint of the existing house, just for, I think our other concern with the side yard setback, it's basically a facade that's 55 foot long. You know, there's no relief in the facade, there's no stepping back in the facade, you know, and it's gonna be rather imposing on the neighbors, especially to the south. So that's our other objection to the setback. We also have an issue with the height that's being proposed. I think, like Liz said, you know, the 12 foot on the first floor and 9 foot on the second floor is pretty extraordinary for a house in Grandview. They also have like a 2-foot heel height on the trusses. I measured the houses on either side, and I'm coming up with that as proposed, this house is going to be about 9.6 feet higher than the house next door, which is the highest house on the block. And there are a lot of 1.5 stories on this block. So 9 foot 6 inches, basically the eave of the proposed house aligns with the peak of the house next door. So pretty tall. So I mean, I'm thinking, you know, in terms of scale, I think it's going to be rather imposing and pretty much stick out on the streetscape. So I did hand out, I just took some pictures of some of the houses in the block so you could see kind of the scale. You know, there's a mix of 1.5 stories. The house on the other side of this has a hipped roof, which minimizes that roof form even more. So again, I think the height that's being proposed, even if 35 feet were allowed, I just don't think it would be appropriate from the scale standpoint. I think the massing is a bit of a concern. We understand that when you do these kind of infills that you need variances, but we would ask that, you know, the massing be considered, the scale being considered. It's a large footprint on the site and compared to the neighboring property. Do you have anything else you might have?
Yeah, I would just note that the insurance review indicated that on page 6 and page 15, that the foundation is intact and undamaged, and that the load-bearing brick column in the middle of the basement is intact and undamaged. So I understand that he wants to take the house down. I would ask that the foundation remain where it is on my side, that doesn't need to change, that the foundation of the house doesn't need to change. He can put an addition on the back, but there's no reason to move that foundation. I also have a lot of concerns about the slopage. There's a desire to do 3 feet, minimum 10, up to 12 feet slow drainage. That will come just straight to my basement. And given all of the water table issues and the school paving the entire area behind our house, I'm gonna have serious flooding if I have a foot grading of 3 feet, essentially coming straight to my basement. With regard to The side variance, you know, again, it's very close. I'm very concerned about the hole that's gonna be created for the basement
For the window
bedroom.
well.
There's gonna be no, where it's currently located, I'm not going to be able to work on my property. I'm not gonna be able to do anything. I don't know how I'm gonna be able to work on the roof or paint or anything, and I don't, anyone noticed the fire, which was terrible, and I felt very bad for you, and I would agree with you that it was potentially electric. The firefighters had to go between our houses, and my house got fully sprayed because they were very worried that my house was gonna catch because of its proximity. And so all of a sudden put that, and like I said, it looks like, I think it's page 39, that it's going over, it's this little bump out on this page. It comes over the property line, but there's gonna be no way to walk between our homes if that happens. And if it's that close, that will be a problem. And then again, with regard to the height, that height issue is an issue for everyone on the street. It's an issue with regard to any kind of construction, be it a building on Davie Avenue that wants to be above 35 feet, or a house that wants to be above 35 feet, and that is a real problem to go above 35 feet. I just don't feel like I'm ever gonna have any privacy in my backyard with a house that high. I don't have any issues about the garage. I always told Marvin, so long as you don't ask for a side variance, you come in the 6 and you go back, I don't care that you ask for a 3-car garage. That's fine.
One thing we were wondering if they would consider pushing the window well back or even around to the back of the house, just because of proximity for fire.
And that
So
would be
the
fine.
point where no variance was requested for that, so it's not on the table and wouldn't be permitted.
Okay.
I didn't pick up on it, the applicant didn't request it.
I just saw it on the drawing, so.
Yeah.
You know, certainly, I'm, you know, happy to try to work out some of these issues, but the way that it's currently planned just is a real problem.
Okay.
I guess I do have one.
Yeah, come on up. Name and address.
Sure, my name is Patrice Del Marzillo. I live at 1279 East Broadview Avenue. I'm 2 doors down from the red house on Broadview Avenue, directly north, 2 houses north of the house that we're talking about. I think my only concern right now really is for my new neighbor who has actually closed on the house on the 28th. They had 4 days. If they got the message, because it went to the person the company that actually purchased the house and booked it, that I feel like they put a huge investment into that house by buying it for what they did. And I feel like if they aren't even here or aware at this point, I feel like that's I just don't think that's fair. I just feel like they need to be a part of knowledge of what is going on next to them. They know it is being demoed, but they haven't yet moved in yet. So that's my concern. It's just that everybody who lives in that proximity, which is right next to it, understands what's going on.
You're talking about the house to your south, the one
Correct.
between you and.
Correct.
So it's just north of the
No,
property.
it's the house
we're
to the
talking
north
about.
of his property.
Yeah, to her south.
Oh, I'm sorry,
South
yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, and somebody else?
Okay. I'm Dora West. I'm at 1327 Broadview Avenue. And I guess the only comment, I walked over this afternoon and looked at it, and I would really love to see a rendering of how the proposed building would look on the block, because I do think, from what I could tell, it would be, and, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot your name. It's definitely much higher than any house, you know, the Ulmer's built a new house a few years ago, and it's pretty tall, but it looks like it would be significantly taller than that. And it really doesn't feel like it would fit in. And then the other thing that I did notice is that if there was that variance to the south, that basically you'd be able to reach out the window of one house and pass something into the next house. So I'm thinking, it's nice to be neighbors, but you maybe don't want quite that proximity.
I'll come up. Okay, so my name is John Andrews. My wife and I, we live at 1276 Broadview Avenue. And we lived at that, we bought our house in 1979, so we're long-termers. And I guess I have one question. So the demolition issue has been resolved then, or no? Okay, so there is approval for that it needs to be demolished, or there
No.
isn't? Oh, okay. So that's up in the air yet?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, that's up to somebody else to decide. I mean, if it needs to be demolished, I'm not opposed to that, if that's the right thing to do. But, I understand, Elizabeth's concerns in terms of the proximity to her house and how that's going to impact her. And, I mean, size-wise and everything, it's not going to really impact me or my wife and our house, because we live across the street, diagonally across the street from Mazen. My main concern, I guess, would be the kind of retaining the character of the street, of the neighborhood. And, we've, my wife and I are kind of sticklers for, wanting to maintain that character and not have something that's just, totally out of the ordinary as far as how the other houses look and everything like that. I mean, we're, willing to, stretch things a little bit, we understand houses in Grandview are smaller and, with people having families and wanting something larger and all that. But, so, just basically wanted to stipulate that, we're okay with whatever's decided as long as it's not something that's gonna totally stick out and look so much different than what the other properties on the street look like.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Okay, before we move off of public comment, we did receive 2 different comments, either by email or through the city website. I assume all the board members read all of these.
Yeah.
I'll kind of just summarize them then.
I guess, you can summarize the one from Mr. Schiff is.
Yes.
Is it consistent with the application in front of us?
I have the same question.
Okay, that's a good question. So one of them is from a Doug Ship at 1242 Broadview. He primarily, he's discussing the scale of it and asking us to remember previous conversations about 1229 to 1237 Grandview Avenue, which was not the BZA. That was Planning Commission, because that was talk of a commercial building. So.
The comment regarding renting as is, though, is where.
Yes, I agree that he does say we ask you that you carefully consider the overall implication of the plan that exceeds code for height and is so close to the adjacent property line could fundamentally change the character of this section of Broadview.
That's where it was.
That part does seem to apply, yes. But I'll assume if we've all read it, I don't need to read the whole thing.
I think that at least what I gathered from this is the concern is the height
Yes.
of houses on Broadview Avenue in relation to whatever would be built in the future on Grandview Avenue and what that means for future developments, but not necessarily this.
Then the other one we received an email from Tim McDermott at 1254 Broadview Avenue, voicing his opposition to the proposed redesign of 1271 Broadview. All right, I guess maybe this one's shorter. I'm just going to read the whole thing. While I am all for renovation of the house or the construction of a new house on the site due to damage, I think that the proposed height is too tall. It would need a variance to get around the current zoning regulations, but it would also be completely out of place on that spot in the neighborhood. I would support a design that keeps in character with the neighborhood along the lines of the many upgraded homes that are on the block currently. The house can be upgraded and improved without going over 35 feet tall, as the many upgraded homes on the block can attest, nor would that make the renovation a financial burden for the owner. That's Tim McDermott's statement. So having no more public comment, we'll open it up to board members' comments, questions, clarifications.
Are we first supposed to comment on our opinions of the demolition?
Yeah, I guess first I would, I would say, you the applicant, you have some options.
Sure.
The primary option right now is, we're gonna talk about all these things.
Yeah.
But you can say, that you can ask to have it tabled to come and come back with something revised.
Okay.
Or you can say you want us to vote. You basically ask us to go ahead and vote. And I'm just being honest about it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think between what we have and what we know you're asking for, I don't think you're going to get all of them. I'm not sure what you are going to get. But the reason I say that, I don't mean that to be harsh.
No.
But the reason I say that is because I think it's going to require some amount of redesign, which then could change the other variances that you're asking for anyways. Once if you redesign because of, I'm just going to pick one, because of lot coverage or height, right? Then that might change some of the other, the specific dimensions of some of the other variances, the other things you're asking for.
Gotcha.
So, I guess if I was you,
Yeah.
I would want us to have a nice, big, long, full discussion of all these points and probably not vote on it.
What happens if you vote and?
Guess tonight. So what's different between that and tabling it?
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
You just show up with it.
I think the application process is somewhat different. He still has to go through notifying neighbors again, though, right?
It would start a new case, I believe, first of all.
If we
So-
voted it down. But if
Yeah.
it's tabled, that's not a new case.
Correct.
And it's some of that application, I don't know what
The-
steps of the application process.
The notices are each time there's a hearing.
Right,
So-
notices would have to happen again,
Mhm.
tabled or a new application.
Correct. You can't, what you couldn't do is come back and ask for the same thing to be heard again. You could make substantive changes and come back and ask for other things.
Right.
But you couldn't ask for the same proposal.
So like if the height gets denied, I can't come back and ask for a height variance.
Well,
Is that what you mean?
you can't come back and ask, I guess, for the same height variance.
So there's, all right.
I think there's a.
Fair enough.
There's a. I mean,
Has
correct
to
me
be
if I'm wrong.
substantive changes to the proposal to be
Right.
able to come back and ask
So I'll get some
for
feedback,
something new.
and then if you approve or deny it, I still, regardless, or table it, still have to do the whole process over and then come back next month with the revised plan.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that's how, yeah. I'm not really
Yeah,
sure what the
I would-
danger is in having us vote.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
mentioned it a few times, you're like, you can table it whenever, as if like,
Yeah,
if it
I
gets
mean,
denied,
that's what we
do I not get
typically
to
do.
apply
I guess I'm
again?
not fully clear, like, oh, I don't know. I think that happens.
There can't be an instance where a variance is requested, that the board, that may not make, sense, if you will, with information before the board at that time. That if there's additional information provided, there would be. So you wouldn't want a ruling in a case like that. Or if you've got if you have a, expectation, for whatever reason, that there may be more favorable vote if a full panel is here, you wouldn't want to vote. So that there are reasons why you wouldn't want to ask for a vote on something. It's cleaner, I'll just say, to ask for tabling. I think that there are, first of all, I would suggest that the board discuss the general merits of the demolition versus reconstruction of the existing home. And then maybe get into, if there is reason to then consider the new home and move on to that discussion.
If I can say, this whole process is kind of a little bit confusing anyways to us. And so we're not against, open feedback. Mainly, I would like to know if we can demolish and start over. That would really kind of set what we could do with the home. We've had it looked at by 2 different structural engineers, actually. We've had it only looked at by one. The insurance had it looked at by another, and they kind of were completely in favor of the insurance company, as if, hey, financially, whatever makes sense for them is what you should do. And so we've been battling them. We actually still haven't even reached an agreement, and this happened in January. They've had 2 different estimates, and I've had 4, and I mean, they're so far apart that it's unreasonable. And so, that's kind of where we're at with that. And so I got a builder to see if we could do that with, I've had 4 different building estimates. I've had 4 rebuild estimates. And like I said, their estimate is always half. And so everybody else is pretty consistent, but the insurance company is not. And obviously, for reasons that they would like to pay less than pay more, or whatever it might be. So we got a structural engineer that doesn't work with them. And he went in there and said it was pretty bad, and I think it's pretty terrible, but I don't build homes. The foundation itself is old. I mean, there's several cracks and other things involved with it, being that home of that age. It was holding up fine when we were living there. I didn't have any problems with it. But now that everything else has happened, and it's been like this for about 9 months or 10 months, the walls are worse than even in the pictures. The ceiling's like coming down. I wouldn't go in the home now. I guess that's really, I would like to know if we can get a demolition.
Yeah, so,
I believe it would be reasonable. They said it would, the builder thinks it would cost more to rebuild the home as opposed to actually start new. Because with the visible damage, it's pretty bad. And then he said, given that after you take out everything else, there will be more damage. So.
yeah, I think with the demo, and we should discuss this, but, part of what's challenging is that we look at the replacement house in order to approve the demo. I mean, we don't look at them as separate decisions. We have to see, okay, well, what's going on, what's going in. We have done, in my time on board, we have approved a demo before that essentially what got built in its place looked like the original house plus an addition. It looked like the original house and that got an addition put on it.
Yeah.
And that was more preferable because it maintained the character, it maintained kind of the look from the street. Like I said, it ended up looking like you rebuilt the house as it was and put an addition on it. Basically, that's what it looked like. Now, I'm not saying that that's exactly what you need to do, but I say that more as an example of looking at the demo. We kind of have to we kind of have to know what's coming, and be okay with that. I don't think that. I mean, I read through both of the reports that you provided, the ones earlier and then this new one. I think it's significant damage. On its surface, I don't have a problem with approving the demo, but it's about what's going in its place. That's part of that calculation, right? I think it is very significant damage. I think we also need to take finances into account, and clearly this most recent one doesn't necessarily say it needs to be demoed for structural reasons, but strongly recommends that says based on the extent of renovations and remodelings that will be required, it's the recommendation to demolish and rebuild. Now, he also talks about rebuilding to, the end result will be, a new single-family residence up to date with all current codes while maintaining the architectural appeal of the neighborhood. So that is kind of, again, what I was talking about, like you can rebuild and maintain that look and then even do an addition at that time, I guess there's addition air quotes at that point, but I think I'm not opposed to demo just on its face. I don't know.
I
your guys'
agree.
thoughts.
I agree with you. I think that given the extent of damage within the home, and obviously lots of other things you're gonna find as you're going, I think that given the current construction environment, it is very likely that it could be more expensive to do a renovation than do a new build. But I think similarly, the new house should be closer in context to the surrounding houses.
And I think we're going to talk about that too. We're going to provide some feedback on that too, as far as just the idea of demo.
I am not opposed to the idea of demo.
Likewise. I mean, first, glad you're okay, your family's okay. Definitely a tough thing to go through. But yeah, likewise. I think seeing the damage, reading this updated report, understanding that there's structural damage, understanding that it might have been electrical, things like that, I think, in my mind, seem to justify that plan for demolition. Beyond that's a different discussion.
Yeah, I think.
I do think there's some merit to the having evaluation of the foundations, or to at least keeping foundations in a similar location.
I'm a little confused, honestly, about that as well. So I know on the drawing it says it's 5 feet from the property line, but.
We were actually just looking at the Montgomery County Auditor's website. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I was very confused.
If what you have is accurate, or I think it needs to be reevaluated.
What I have?
It looks different, like
Because I have a
Her
driveway on
statement
that
about
right
it being,
side.
about
This
her
is the
house
five.
being pretty much right on top of the property line is what it looks like on the auditor's website.
Yeah, it's not. The auditor has the wrong,
It
it's
actually,
not correct.
my fence is a foot off of the property line. And as I said, I got a boundary construction easement done with the other property on the other side, so I know exactly where my property line is. The property line, I'm so sorry, I've interrupted, I apologize. The property line isn't straight, it goes diagonal, so at the front, he may want 5 feet, but at the back, it's only like 4.2. That's why they're asking for the variance to 4 feet, because the house goes straight, but the property line does not.
And she does have, I included the boundary survey that locates her house. Pretty accurate.
4 feet is in the, on the agenda. The drawings show 5 feet.
And with the center.
Yeah.
Right.
I think there's some errors in the site.
Yeah, but then when you look at page 37, it shows that it's only like 3 feet off the property line at the back rear covered porch and back of the house.
I'm not following, I'll be honest. I don't see where it says. I just see 5 feet like straight back, but
Yeah,
The
that's,
property
I
line
could be
isn't
wrong,
straight.
or
The property
this,
line
this
is
could
like
be
this.
wrong. And then the garage, the current garage now is kind of like in the middle of the property, and it's not, we don't use anything behind it. It's just like neglected space. And if we're gonna build a longer home, then we would like,
I think also, if we were talking about a demolition and then a new build, I think some reference to some of the new builds that have been built recently would be helpful. Because I think, similar to what Director Colker mentioned, I think the 12-foot floor to ceiling height on the first floor is unusual even for a lot of the new builds. And that height really does make a huge difference. There's a couple of other taller houses that we've talked about and either approved or disapproved recently that you can tell, some of the taller ones, you can tell the difference even by just a couple feet. It makes a huge difference on the block.
As opposed to like shortening the roof, maybe changing the pitch or something.
It seems some of the, having just a really tall house compared to the rest of them, just, it feels really overwhelming to the houses right next to them. And it seems, it makes a couple of those houses seem out of proportion.
I think the current home now, it's pretty tall, but like I was talking to them earlier, I'm not against like changing the pitch of the roof or something to bring it down, you know. I'm sure we could figure something out with it.
As I should mention, I also think the porch too, if you look at the height of the porches on the adjacent property,
Yeah,
from the picture charts up, but they're probably at least 3 or 4 feet out of this one is, it's not dimensioned, but probably less than 12 inches, and I think that also visually kind of creates some imbalance too.
So I think for us to evaluate in your proposal, an elevation that shows houses on either side, either, and it could be photographic or an architectural drawing, to compare the porch height, to compare style, to compare the roof height would be extremely helpful. Also, a plan showing where your proposed house is sitting and what your setback is from Broadview, so that we can see that in comparison to the other houses as well.
yeah, I think, I guess, just to try to be as helpful as we can be, I wanted to go through each of the variances that were on the agenda and just yeah, I mean, it's all kind of going to be general comments from But yeah, I don't know, how do you wanna, there's a lot of interplay between the different things. We think, one thing could change.
The lot coverage one, though, do you feel like if the hardscape went away, that wouldn't be an issue then?
I think it's resolvable
Okay.
with changes to the hardscape based on the information that was provided. There's some additional calculations that would be helpful to have the design professional do.
Sure.
I'm doing what I can do with imperfect tools. But yeah, I think so.
For me also, for potentially a future meeting would be to have the existing condition with dimensions documented. That's like, for example, is the driveway getting bigger or smaller? Because on one thing, it looks like it's bigger, on another one, it might be getting smaller, and that's where understanding what is the current condition versus
Right.
the proposed condition.
We typically we do have,
That was provided.
That's what you.
Yeah.
that's the neighbor's record plat. Okay. Yeah, we do usually get, that's usually helpful too, like just the record plat that you would have gotten,
Survey document.
Yeah, your survey document when you closed on the house kind of thing. Sometimes that's helpful.
Because it may make us realize that it is an existing condition, as we talked about, keeping the foundation where it is. We may say, oh, okay, then that
Right.
makes us feel differently. Because it
Right.
looks, again, on one of the drawings, it looks like the house was just shifted to the left by a foot or two. And so could we avoid some of these things by shifting to its current foundation location?
Right.
Again, if that's correct
yeah.
location.
And similarly, I think on the site plans, I'd just like to understand better what actually is the proposed landscape or hardscape.
Yeah, you understand what she was saying about the hardscape in the back. So in other words,
Yeah, asphalt versus
paving
grass.
paving that doesn't count as part of your driveway counts against you in that lot coverage calculation.
Yeah, so I can like shorten like
And that, I don't know, sidewalks or
the
patios or whatever, the
pattern
pattern.
to the garage or something.
Right.
Yeah, so it's just not incredibly clear on this plan. Which part's driveway, what part is intended to be grass or other softscape, and then which part is intended to be something else.
I would just say, when we look at this again, this is a really large plan, and so the more context you can give us about how it fits into the neighborhood, more renderings of what it's going to look like compared to other houses, all the things that a lot of the other board members have said, the more of that you can provide. Worst case, you provide us more than we need, right? And some things aren't as useful, but it's just with what we have today, especially, it's hard to quite understand the context of as is versus to be drawings and things like that. So that helps guide our discussion a lot as well.
From an aesthetic standpoint, I think a number of other people commented on this, but typically, per the design guidelines, one long mass, or like the right side elevation, which is the north side. I tend to like to see that broken up a little bit more, because otherwise it just appears as one long wall, especially with the size of this house and in relation to other houses. And however you want to break up the materiality or step it back, but something else to give it a little more dimensionality and relief.
Yeah, and I think that would apply to both sidewalls.
I think so too.
Especially when coupled with the height too.
Yep.
The width, when
Yes.
is that
Sure.
height?
Right. I know the height variance was not in our list of variances, but it was going to be needed. And I think there are things that you can do to not have to request that variance, some of that, like that 12-foot ceiling coming down. And, you know, I don't know, architects have a lot of clever ways of doing those things.
For reference, I think a couple of the newer houses that have been built, I think actually one of the ones that we might be talking about, their first floor height is 10 feet ceilings, and their second floor is 9.
All of the Grandview Yard single-family homes are 10 and high.
Yeah, we've certainly, you know, I heard a lot from public comment and the messages we got about the height. Obviously, that's been a sensitive issue from the community, and I think, you know, we are here. If there's a variance, then that's what comes before us. If you're under the, if you don't need a variance, if you're under the code requirement,
The code's 35 feet.
is it 35
It is
35, and it's measured at the peak and it's
Above.
the house.
above grade?
Yes.
Yes.
But do we have an idea how many houses actually reach that 35? There's not very many, are there?
There are. It is a matter of how the overall mass is articulated, right? To how scale appears is very much related to how the architectural form is articulated. This house, as proposed, it just feels a little, it's inflated overall. All of the dimensions, all of the geometry feels just expanded kind of uniformly, rather than in discrete, you know, moves that would help break down the mass. Even if you look at the rear elevation of the house, it appears smaller because it's got a second gable and you know, it really breaks down the mass in the back, actually more so than in the front. So there are a lot of different things that can be done to do that.
Are those 35-foot homes south of First versus between First and Third?
They're scattered throughout the community.
I mean, the average height in the street is probably like 24 feet, just for comparison. You know, on this block, they're fairly short, they're shorter.
If you figure 10 feet is relatively tall for a historic home, but it's 10 and 10 plus, you know, 3 up from the ground, and then you've got the gable pitch, sorry. So the 35, it's not like a garage that's your measured mid-roof, it's to the peak. So it's not as tall as it actually sounds. So anyway, if you include, you know, a half story or more for the gable peak, you're 10, 20, 24, 30.
Yeah,
I think 30
right around
feet is
30.
fairly common,
Yeah.
30, 32, somewhere in there. But 35 is permitted.
It's a lot.
We give enough direction on aesthetic, but you know, in terms of matching the existing character of the street.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the home kind of looks like the existing home now, just, I mean, I guess the only difference to me is really the porch.
And that's certainly a main
It's like-
element of it.
It's like 2 feet shorter, but I mean, it still has the like long cross porch, it still has the roof that goes over the porch. We kept the point, you know, the structure itself, like the home, it already kind of goes up just like that. It's actually the same width, I believe it's less wide, the current home is wider, it's like 25 feet, I believe this is 24. And
So
then the current driveway to the right is 9 feet. So we kept it the same.
Then why would it be getting closer to the
That's
south?
the part I don't understand. That's how,
I'm not sure, I'm not sure your site plan is accurate,
Yeah,
your survey, so maybe a boundary survey would help you. I think he's got it drawn straight, and it's not, it's angled slightly.
you know what I'm talking about? So like, on my right, there's a driveway, it's 9 feet, and then if the home is 24 feet wide, I don't see how it could possibly get closer to you.
Well, then you would need a variance.
It's,
Right. You're gonna stay
what you have
6
shown is 2 feet closer.
Yeah.
On your site plan,
Yeah.
So something's off in there. I think,
So, yeah, so it sounds like
I
it's.
think it's easily fixed with an accurate
The
survey.
floor plan looks to be dimensioned 26.8. It's pretty fuzzy.
Is it?
Yeah.
That's how I was saying, like,
For the other document that was provided earlier, it looks as though the new house is a foot shorter. It just, that's
Well, it does seem like
a foot narrow.
the new house is
Let's move further to the south.
moved to the south from
Like a foot south?
maybe a couple of feet. I mean, I don't know, 2 or 3, let's say.
You're right. I think it just needs to be verified where exactly it
Gotcha.
is on the lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? Please. Are you working directly with this architect, or is it through a builder?
It's
Or
through a builder. So I just
Um,
tell him what we want, and he presents it.
It is often very helpful to the architect to have some direct contact to staff, and certainly to be provided with the design guideline packet that we have, if they haven't been. I'll say in the staff report, I touched on high-level topics. There are a lot of details in the house that might want to be considered. So the more longer I look at it, the more things I see. The depth of the eaves is atypical for us. You look at your typical eaves in Grandview, they vary, but 18 to 24 inches is pretty common. And you've got maybe, I don't know, they're much smaller than that. All those kinds of little details are what will align with the neighborhood more closely, as well as the attention to some scale adjustments.
And that's something you typically do, available to.
I guess I'm offering to do that. It's
Yeah.
helpful to the architects, I will say, typically
Yes.
to be able to have a kind of unfiltered conversation, if that's something
Yeah,
that you'd like to have them do.
that'd be great. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
There's a large drain in your backyard.
There's a
On the-
drain?
Yep, that was put in by Chester Cheek. What's gonna happen to that drain? Behind the house?
Where does it drain to?
It drains to the street.
I'm not familiar with the drain in the backyard.
Oh, I'll show it to you. It was something Chester put in.
Like a,
Drain.
A yard drain.
The yard drain.
are you sure?
Yep.
And it runs all the way to the curb?
No, none of our drains run to the curb. They run to the sidewalk,
Oh, okay.
and they're grandfathered in, so nobody,
Yeah,
a
that's
few
fine.
people,
Mine run to the sidewalk.
yeah.
Mine goes to the sidewalks, I just put it in. Because
Oh,
I had
we
so
didn't
much
hear
water
that.
in back.
Yeah.
Just got
Is
them
it behind
done.
the garage?
No, it's in front of the garage.
I saw it today.
Yeah,
Oh, is it that?
one other comment.
it's a drain.
Okay.
One other comment is also verify the egress well, because you show that on the plans for the basement detail,
Mm-hmm.
but they aren't on any of the other dimensions. And based on currently where it's at, it can't go there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not
So-
putting a variance for that.
The back.
or-
The back is
Next to
certainly
that.
not, but you have the porch there, right? So I don't know if that's gonna be, you have a covered porch on the back.
It is, not the whole thing though, so. I believe the whole thing.
Yeah, it is the whole thing.
Is it? Let's see. Yes.
And it's all, that portion's all unexcavated too, so.
Yeah,
Yeah, that could be done.
we'll have to figure that one out.
So I guess, you know, we want to give you as much of our impressions as we can to empower you going forward. So if you have any questions,
No. Sounds like I'm gonna reach out to my architect and have him call.
I think that's a good start. That's a good idea.
But it's nice to know that, no, not against demolition, because that really would change things quite a bit. You know, as opposed to trying to work and draw up a new house. Then we could just figure out how to replace that, or, you know, rebuild it somehow. But to get demolition, you would need the proposed home.
Yeah, in order to,
And
so
so
it's part of that.
You were saying earlier, though, that it has to be applied for separately?
Just that there's a second application. This is for the hearing. You did the application for the hearing. There's an application for the demolition of the house. And that has to be filed along with some other information that's in the staff report, but you can also go look at the code. And you get the demolition permit that says all the different things that have to happen for the demolition permit to be able to be filed and granted. So you need those things as well.
In this order, would this have to be approved first, or would that get approved first? Simultaneously?
I think they could be done in one hearing. If the board has expressed a willingness to consider the demolition, that would, if I were, you know, in your shoes, give me anyway enough confidence to move forward with a new home proposal. So if you were to come back with a revised proposal for the new home, the board could rule on that first, if you will, and then rule on the demolition kind of all together, as long as you have all the information that's needed for the demolition permit filed and included in the next BZA application. Right, so if we have everything together, I think it can be done in one hearing if it suits the board.
You're saying today we don't have that information?
No, we
Yeah.
don't.
Sorry.
And we don't have an approved house, which you also have to have.
Okay.
So would I need a new application, or should I just table this one? Complicated, right?
Be up to you, but
Well,
it seems like a
Well,
table
if I have
might be
to,
appropriate.
because now I have to apply for the demolition as well,
But it can continue the case. So
Okay.
you still have the same case.
and then I could just add that to this case. We can add stuff to it.
Yeah, add, replace, yes,
Amend.
amend.
Yeah,
Yeah, that sounds a little bit better. So maybe we should say this till next month?
yeah, I think that's probably what you want us to do, is table
Most
it.
likely.
Um,
I don't get the difference anyways, it's like if I apply again, it'll just be next month anyways. And I
Yeah,
still have
I
to
don't-
send out all the
is there
notices
like an
anyhow.
If you were,
application fee?
if you were to take, so if you're to table, we're not gonna charge you another application fee.
Okay.
You're gonna continue with the case number 13-2022.
Okay,
And when it comes time to, you do another pre-application, where you bring to the pre-application meeting the updated architectural drawings, any information that Liz or Bob or any city staff would cooperate with you on.
okay.
And basically, you'd be using that existing application number that you have now. The only difference would be you would be providing you updated drawings, et cetera. Notification is required at every single submittal, so that portion doesn't, but the nice side of it is you already know who you have to notify, so you can reuse your simpler spreadsheet if needed.
Yeah.
You have more information going forward.
Okay. More of that. You guys want to table this, save it till next month?
yeah. We can do that.
I will have
We need a motion.
the architect working on this, reach out to you.
Yeah.
And hopefully-
This conversation to sensitize them to what the issues are can really help move the process forward.
Make a motion to table BZA case 13-2022 for 1271 Broadview Avenue to next month's meeting.
Second.
Can I ask an individual question? do people who like commented by email, or if they had the same comments, do they have to redo them, or are they still part of the record because it's part of the case?
So when the approval of minutes come, or when the minutes, assuming the minutes are approved next month, on that assumption, the public comment, the public comments from this particular meeting will be attached to those approved minutes. So any new meeting going forward, you'll want that public comment to come forward for that particular meeting.
Yeah, and conceivably, the application will be different, so we wouldn't know, we wouldn't be able to assume that those comments apply to a new application packet. Right?
So that being whether it's online or whether it's in person, where all of you are joining us, you'll want to attend or provide written public comment to us for each case, or for each meeting date.
All right, let's go back to the roll for the table.
Gottman?
Yes.
La Souza?
Yes.
Calnell?
Yes.
Chair Kinzinger?
Yes.
Okay, you're tabled, and then if whatever information you need from us, or emails, or, yeah, let us know.
Thank you. All right. Any additional business? Staff announcements, anything? Okay. Adjourned.